We may be witnessing a critical shift in how we think about Iran's nuclear program. In a new article published in Real Clear Defense, my guest argues that Iran's more immediate path to a bomb may not be uranium at all, but plutonium. I'm Leila Bazi, MBN Editor-in-Chief, and this is a conversation I wanted to have with Henry Sokolski, Executive Director of the Non-Proliferation Policy Education Center, former Pentagon official for nuclear policy, and someone who has been at the center of the non-proliferation debate for decades, and the author of the article I just referred to. Henry, great to have you.
Good to be with you.
Let me start here. Everyone is focused on Iran's uranium program, but you, in your article today, you argue we may be looking in the wrong place. Are we looking at the wrong place?
No, I surely don't want to be misunderstood. Uranium is a perfectly decent material, which if properly enriched, turned into metal and machined, can make a bomb core and set off, several kilotons up to any number of other things as an explosive. So, it would be churlish to say, oh, well, that's not of any importance. But what I cannot understand, and I tried to point out in the article, is while there are canisters of gas called uranium hexafluoride that can be converted into ceramics or oxides, which then can be converted into metal, which then can be machined into a core, those are a lot of steps. Getting to the material is going to be very difficult, according to many experts. It's buried. There could be decoys. We are fascinated with making sure that material doesn't get turned into bombs. And it would, according to some estimates, be equivalent to, 10 bombs, somewhere in that neighborhood. Okay, well, if you were that focused on something that difficult to turn into a bomb, surely you would be also interested in plutonium, which you can find in the spent fuel pond of a major nuclear power plant in Iran called Bushehr.
Bushehr, yeah.
The Russians who have helped finish the plant and operated it an awful lot. I think there were a lot of Russians at the site for many decades. Building it and operating it. Well, they tell you, in all honesty, well, there's 210 tons of spent fuel there. It's sitting there. That's equivalent to about enough kilograms. Well, how should I put it? In that spent fuel are a lot of things. One of the elements, about 1% of it, is plutonium that can be used to make bombs. Well, how much plutonium is in that 210 tons? Roughly enough plutonium to make not about 10 bombs, but 200.
Wow.
It's a bigger number. Now, there are many steps. You have to take the material out of the building that it's stored in a wet pond. You have to take it out of the pond. You have to crack the thing, the fuel rod open because it's clad in, metallic zirconium. Then you have to chemically strip out the plutonium, and there are a number of processes for that. And then you have to take that, turn it into oxide. Then you have to turn it into a metal. Then you have to machine it. But guess what? The distance in technical difficulty and time between where that plutonium is in the spent fuel pond and where the uranium hexafluoride gas is buried underneath the rubble of places like Fordo and Natanz is about the same. It's not that different. Not only that, but the uncertainty about whether they have facilities to do all of this is about as great in both cases. Now, am I saying that, they're going to make a bomb immediately and we have to worry? Or am I saying, we should just focus on the plutonium thing and uranium? Not at all. What's weird is we're not paying any attention to the plutonium option, which potentially is much larger a mine for bombs than the uranium is.
So this is what I wanted to ask you next. So is this being ignored or misunderstood? Because this is when I read your article, I looked at it and I said, why this is never being part of the public conversation or a conversation for the public? Why is that?
Well, I hesitate to answer because honestly, my answers would impugn people's motives, and you're never supposed to do that. So let me go ahead and do that.
Go ahead, shoot.
Because that's all I've got. I think we would like to believe that the plutonium that's produced in reactors can't be used for weapons because there is there's something called weapons grade plutonium versus reactor grade plutonium, which, to be honest, is a little bit easier to work with to make bombs. But it's long been understood that you can make perfectly decent kiloton or even higher yield weapons out of reactor grade because a lot of the stumbling blocks of bringing this material together before it fizzles and explodes has gotten better and better. And what a state like Iran will start with to assemble that material in an implosion device is not the technology that we started with in 1945. It's more advanced. And when you get to this even just slightly more advanced technology of the 1950s, or even actually the late 40s, a lot of the problems associated with reactor grade plutonium evaporate. Okay, now that's one possible reason, but let me build on that. Well, why did we want to believe that reactor grade plutonium might not be useful for bombs? Because we wanted nuclear power. We love nuclear power. We can't have enough of it, you see. And this is a bit of a blemish that makes that prospect not look as bright. I think that's part of it. And it's not for nothing that the Russians, for example, promised when they created this plant that they would take all the spent fuel back. Well, they did, but they never actually took it back. They forgot.
Did they forget?
Well, it turns out it's expensive.
Something to forget.
It's expensive. These are heavy fuel assemblies, and so they probably should have done so every at least 3 to 5 years. Well, they ran the plant from 2011 to roughly until a few months ago when they shut it down. They decided, nah. Now, you can impugn motives there and say, well, maybe they wanted to give Iran an option to do something nefarious. Who the heck knows? The bottom line is it's there.
And it's an option.
International inspectors are not coming anymore. The plant's turned off. It would be pretty easy to walk into that building and walk out with the fuel assemblies and start chemically starting the process down the road to an insertable implosion core. Now, there are lots of questions. I'm not saying this isn't prospect, but it seems to me that the United States or Israel or someone should be looking at that plant from space or drones or whatever to make sure nothing leaves the building.
So you're talking about the monitoring.
I think the monitoring is not where it needs to be. The International Atomic Energy Agency has an option that you can volunteer to undertake. It's called near real-time surveillance.
Yes, the surveillance. Okay.
Okay, now it turns out Iran refused to do this with regard to the spent fuel pond at Bushehr. They were forced to accept it for their enrichment activities at Natanz. And what is near real-time surveillance? It's a camera that's digital that takes pictures and relays what it sees, I don't know, once every 5-10 minutes through fiber optic or secure satellite links to a remote location where inspectors can look at the pictures. Well, why do you need to look? In many of the cases where they use the traditional camera, It sits for 90 days. It sits for 90 days and it looks at the spent fuel, it looks at the reactor. But here's the problem. You don't go to it and see what it saw for 90 days. I know for a fact, having worked with the IAEA researching their programs.
And that was in 2015 when they pushed for the near real-time monitoring. And this is what you're referring to when Iran refused?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, at least for Bushehr.
For Bushehr, yeah.
Yeah, and I think this system that they have is a camera that you can't get to except when you visit, and you can only visit once every 90 days. So when you look at the film, if you will, or the digital outtake for 90 days, you discover, oh, look, there was a blackout. I can't see anything. What happened? Did they pull any fuel rods? You do not know. Oh, look, there's a crane that's in front of the camera. I can't see. Did they do something nefarious? You do not know. And that's the reason the near real-time ability to sense an image every 5 minutes allows you to know, oh my God, there's a blackout. We got to send somebody over there to find out what the heck's going on.
Yeah.
In the United States, when it cut that deal, did not insist on that. And to the IAEA's credit, the International Atomic Energy Agency's credit, they did, but were rebuffed. I would say from here on out, we need to stop being so accommodating.
That was a strategic mistake from our end. In the US, we did not pursue that. We were accommodating. And in a way, we are paying the price now for it.
Well, you know, if you don't know that you're paying the price, I guess you don't pay the price. But we're certainly increased our risk budget by not nailing that down. Now, I actually had a pretty senior congressman briefed, and he went and briefed President Obama. He went in one ear, nothing happened. And I think the reason why is they didn't want to upset the deal that they cut. And so, you know, this was an additional after the fact, request. Well, no, we're done. Well, okay. But now, if it was just Iran, it would be bad enough. But we're about to build reactors not that different from the one that is at Bushehr, and they're building another one. So you could say more than one. In Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Turkey.
That's something I'm going to go back to. I want to go back to Bushehr because you are strongly warning against striking Bushehr, noting that simulations suggest a radiological release could force the evacuation of tens of thousands of potentially millions of people. Why would that be such a dangerous miscalculation? Are we talking about a potential radiological disaster if that facility was hit?
No, well, I don't think that's the case.
Okay.
There has been loose talk amongst some commentators that, oh, well, we should just bomb Bushehr. Well, how do you, first of all, I don't think that's necessary or a good idea. I don't think it's necessary because it's on cold shutdown. It's not producing anything for anybody, much less for any military purpose. So I think that would be gratuitous. But some people say, oh, well, they might be able to use it in the future for this or that. We need to eliminate it. Well, excuse me. When you bomb something like that, you have to be very careful that you do not encourage a loss of coolant to the core or to the spent fuel pond that would result in a fire that would then result in the release of an enormous amount of radioactivity. And that's where you get the evacuation figures. It gets very, very intense. Now, are there ways to disable a nuclear power plant without running those risks? I'll be honest, there are, militarily. But you don't, this idea of being glib about this is a mistake. I think the bigger mistake, if I can be so bold, is thinking that building these reactors that are potentially vulnerable to being hit in such a way that they could release lots of radioactivity and force large evacuation. This is just another way to produce electricity and boil water. They are not. The other dimension that makes them different is they produce weapons usable plutonium that is not that difficult to extract to make bombs. Now, people say, well, these power reactors have never been used for that. Well, let's examine that. I think it's fair to say that the light water reactor, which is the most popular kind, the one that Iran has and the one that we're thinking about building and the Russians are building in places like Egypt, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and of course the UAE, these reactors actually, I don't think, have been used to make weapons plutonium, but they are used to make weapons tritium in the United States, for example. And Ronald Reagan had a plan to use unfinished light water reactors in Washington State to make weapons plutonium. Not only that, the Turks did a study in 1970 saying, if we had these light water reactors, could we use them to make weapons plutonium? They correctly concluded that they could. So it's kind of like a loaded gun. It hasn't been fired, but it's quite sporty to build these things. I don't think people are thinking clearly about all of this. They see it as some kind of attractive technology, and they're more than willing to subsidize it because it's very expensive. And all of these downsides are kind of handled in a gentlemanly-like way. I think we got to be a little bit tougher about all this.
If we want to zoom out for a moment on all this, and as the world prepares for the nuclear non-proliferation treaty review conference in New York, which is happening very soon, it's a major global meeting happening every 5 years to assess nuclear risks. Is the international community focusing on the right threat when it comes to Iran / others than Iran as well? Now with what's going on, how's going to be the impact on Russia?
Those are good questions. I'm not sure, and let me explain. I'm pretty sure the topic of bombing Iran's got to come up. I mean, come on, it's in the headlines, right?
Yes.
How people think about that may not be complete thoughts, though. I can give you an example. It's very standard to argue that any nuclear activity or material that conceivably is usable for some civilian purpose and is occasionally visited by international inspectors should be presumed not to be any problem with regard to possibly being diverted to make bombs. Well, how did that work in the case of, let me start the list, India? Not so well.
No.
Pakistan, not so well. Iraq, a little bit of near history. I can keep going. The problem is that when countries get into the business of making nuclear fuel, which is either recycling the spent reactor fuel chemically to strip out the plutonium and recycle the plutonium as a fissile material for reactors, or you make uranium, which is very slightly enriched in a certain isotope that's good for making bombs, and you enrich it so it has a lot of that isotope and becomes weapons grade by either enriching or recycling. When you let countries get into that, you better hope that they're friendly forever, because at any moment, the distance between that activity and making a bomb could be very short, so short that the idea that, well, we visited it. Well, so what? I mean, in 2 or 3 weeks, if they had their bomb device already on the ready and they had these other activities going, they could have it. So I think we need to at least understand that there are some nuclear activities that are quite close to bomb making and probably too dangerous to ever reliably inspect to detect a diversion in enough time to stop it. And this is as old as the atomic era. J. Robert Oppenheimer, a very famous American leader of the Manhattan Project, pointed all of this out with other experts in something called the Acheson-Lilienthal Report in 1946. For some reason, nobody reads the darn thing. It is actually correct. I mean, there are a number of things in that report that are mildly breathless, and I wouldn't recommend believing it all. But that technical point, they got that right.
Mm-hmm.
And we keep coming back to this. Well, maybe we should do something about this. Well, it's lots of people want to make fuel. So, well, I think, if you want to have a world with a raft of countries like Iran on the brink of making bombs, and you think that's going to make things more peaceful, good luck.
So, going back to the point of Iran, I'm going to ask you this very plainly. If nothing changes in the situation now, there's no deal that's to be made, how real is the risk that Iran could pursue this plutonium path quietly and surprise the world?
Well, the short answer is if you don't get inspectors in there to at least tip us off that something's walking out of the building in the form of a spent fuel rod, yeah, it would be quite tempting.
To do it.
And that's quite possible. The enthusiasm of Iran to invite the International Atomic Energy Agency back into the fold of looking at this plant is not red hot. I think they are very wary. And they've said they're thinking of leaving the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty altogether. The new people in Parliament are demanding to get much more hard-nosed about this. Well, so it's conceivable that if that was the case, it would not be that hard. I think the same applies with the uranium enrichment too, however. We do not know where all of the material is. We don't know if they have any of these other shops. Now, we've destroyed a lot of things that are those shops, but do we know that that's all they have or that they can't rebuild it somewhere else? I don't see how you ever can know. And, until you have a regime that decides we want to get out of this business, like, I don't know, South Africa got out of the business, Libya did, Taiwan did. Well, okay, but, that has not happened.
For me, from what I see, that they did starve their people. They did spend money on this nuclear, and they fight the word for it, and they did spend money on the proxies. I see such a regime. It would be so hard for them to give up on that, as if all these years they're gonna give it up just all of a sudden. I'm not sure this is not the type of regime who gives up on things.
Okay. I think if that's true, then you've got a problem. And I think you probably do. I mean, President Trump recognizes this because he said, well, it would be great if we could change the regime. And now to be honest, it's quite clear he's backpedaling, saying, well, in a way we've changed the regime and maybe, can I get out now? But people are saying, well, you really haven't changed things. If anything, they're more radical, or at least as radical as they used to be. So, I am not an expert on Iranian politics, but the bottom line is you'd want to be very sure of any country that was making either enriched uranium or recycling spent fuel to use plutonium, that they were your absolute best friends, and we're going to stay that way forever. I mean, after all, people forget, but the United States was extremely trustful of the Shah of Iran, and he wanted to get nuclear weapons.
Yeah.
And we thought, oh, well, as long as he's in and we lean on him, we don't have to worry about anything.
Look how
we have influence over him.
Yeah.
Well, but he went away.
Yeah, he went away. Yeah.
And so, the idea that this can't happen anywhere else in the Middle East ever, well, it'd be nice, but is it true? I don't know.
You just mentioned UAE, KSA, they are all seeking to have this nuclear enrichment for power, for many reasons, for civilian reasons.
Well, now, in fairness, the UAE has forsworn making nuclear fuel. We did the right thing there. Now, what they rightly are complaining about is if we cut a deal, as we probably are gonna, with Saudi Arabia, which allows them or encourages them or helps them make enriched uranium, there is a codicil or a provision in the agreement that we cut with the UAE saying, well, if we cut a more favorable deal than your neighbor, you certainly have the right to consult with us to see if you can get it. Well, this is why, if we're drawing the line as hard as we are against bomb-making activities or activities that could easily spill over into bomb-making, in the case of Iran, you'd like to think we'd be a little bit more consistent, tough about the neighbors as well.
Henry Sokolski, thank you. Really important insight. And that's the key question from this conversation. Are we preparing for the wrong nuclear threat? Because if the focus remains narrow, the real risk may be unfolding somewhere else out of sight and potentially faster than expected. Thank you.